federal laws protect the rights of all students to an equal opportunity to participate in and benefit from the programs and activities the university provides. And here's something that really I think is very important, particularly for the professors and staff and faculty who teach in these settings, is that while by law a student has a right to come to your college, university, whatever, he or she has to meet the admissions criteria. That the admissions criteria are the same for students with and without disabilities. So students without disabilities are not given any special slack or any special consideration just because they have a disability. Because the point we're making here is that, and again, keep this in mind, that students must be able to meet the essential academic standards of the school if they are provided reasonable accommodations. Okay? So this is different K through 12. K through 12, you were given accommodations, you were supported in school just because you had a disability. When we talk about it in college, when we're talking about this, we're talking that you have to have the basic skills and abilities to be successful, or it's not a consideration. Laws that exist that are particularly relevant for access to higher education started with the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, Section 504, and that was a law that said basically, no otherwise, and I'll read it out here, no otherwise qualified handicapped individual shall, solely by reason of his handicap, be excluded from the participation in, be denied the benefits of, are subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. So that was early 1970s, 73, and that set the stage for access. You also, within that, had what was called Section 508. Section 508 addressed the technology issues, technology needs. And so, again, in a law that was passed many years ago, there is even a section in it that said, and the technology we use needs to be accessible. Now, I mentioned both of these because, again, these are laws that were passed many years ago in the 70s, and yet even today in 2013, accessibility related to technology remains a major issue for a lot of students. The ADA is the third law that has an impact, and again, it supports everything that we've talked about so far, and in particular supports the idea that students have a right to auxiliary aids. So if they need an interpreter, that's something that most certainly the ADA would say a school has to be able to provide. When we think about accommodations, certainly a question arises as to who qualifies. And when we think about who qualifies, we're using kind of the ADA definition that says, a student has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits some activity of daily living, such as hearing, seeing, speaking, learning, walking, breathing, performing manual tasks. It's quite a range of things there. Now, one of the questions that arises oftentimes from teachers and faculty and so forth is, do I really have to provide this? Is it, how important is this, if you will? And sometimes you even get people talking about this, and this is most often in a university setting, talking about it as being an issue of academic freedom, that it's my right to choose what I do. Now, I would say, while certainly academic freedom is a great value, that the bottom line on all of this is it's a law, that it's against the law not to provide an approved accommodation. That if a student has disclosed, a student has done what he or she is supposed to, you've been formally notified that an accommodation has been approved, it's no longer a question of, are you willing to go along with it or not? It's your responsibility. It's what I might call a non-optional job duty. Now, I will note, certainly, that while the request for an accommodation is legally binding, that as a teacher or a faculty member, you have the right, certainly, to talk to the office that worked with the student to come up with the accommodation, because there may be times where you don't necessarily agree, but you have to provide that accommodation and continue to provide it until you had a grievance or mediation process. Include a statement in your syllabus that indicates your willingness to talk with students and provide approved accommodations. As an example, the statement used at Northern Illinois University is included in today's lesson. Also, based on a recent Faculty Senate resolution in spring 2013, all course syllabi must include an accessibility statement.
In addition, as mentioned earlier, one of the most important things you can do to protect this is to protect the student's confidentiality, especially within the classroom.
So in summary for this segment, want to emphasize that when we're talking about access to higher education, that the laws are there that do still ensure that we have access, but only those people who are eligible. It's not something that everyone gets, but you have to have the ability to be successful. And we talked about the idea of when we come to accommodations, who qualifies? It's somebody who has a disability. And how is it determined? It's determined by looking at, does that disability have any impact on class and education access and being successful? And if so, how can an accommodation be made to help level the playing field? And then the final part we talked about in this segment had to do with confidentiality and disclosure, and just the idea that maintaining both of those when we're working with students who have disabilities is a most clear way of indicating respect and showing them dignity.